Ed Sullivan stood in his office at CBS, holding a booking proposal that made him deeply uncomfortable. It was spring 1968, and his talent coordinators were pushing him to book Jimi Hendrix, the wild electric guitar player who set his instruments on fire and played with his teeth. "This is not Sullivan Show material," Ed told his producers firmly. "This is chaos disguised as music. Volume and theatrics don't belong on family television." But what happened in the next 3 weeks would completely change Ed's understanding of what real musicianship looked like. And it all started with a phone call from Bob Dylan that Ed almost didn't take. Before you hear this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is how America's most conservative TV host learned to recognize genius when it came dressed in psychedelic clothes. To understand Ed Sullivan's resistance to booking Jimi Hendrix in 1968, you need to understand what Ed valued in musical performance. Ed had built his reputation on presenting polished, professional entertainment to America's families. When he said, "We have a really big show tonight," viewers trusted him to deliver quality acts that would entertain without shocking or offending. Ed had survived the rock and roll revolution by being selective. He'd booked Elvis, but with restrictions. He'd presented the Beatles, but on his terms. He understood that popular music was changing, but he believed there were limits to how far television should go in embracing that change. Jimi Hendrix represented everything Ed feared about where rock music was heading. The performances Ed had seen on film showed a musician who seemed more interested in spectacle than song, more focused on volume than melody. The guitar behind the head tricks, the feedback orchestras, the apparent chaos of his live shows. None of it aligned with Ed's vision of quality entertainment. "He's a showman, not a musician," Ed told his head of programming during a booking meeting. "Take away the amplifiers and the fire and the noise, and what's left? I won't book acts that rely on volume to hide their lack of real talent." But the pressure to book Hendrix was mounting. "Are You Experienced" had changed rock music, and younger viewers were demanding to see Hendrix on television. Ed's competitors were circling, hoping to book the electric guitar sensation if Sullivan passed. Ed's talent coordinators were frustrated. "Mr. Sullivan, Hendrix is the biggest thing in rock music right now. If we don't book him, someone else will, and we'll lose credibility with young viewers." "Then let someone else have him," Ed replied. "I won't compromise this show's standards for ratings." That's when Bob Dylan called. Ed and Dylan had a complex relationship. Dylan's 1965 appearance on the show had been successful, but Ed remained puzzled by Dylan's evolution from folk singer to electric rocker. Still, Ed respected Dylan's intelligence and artistic integrity. When Dylan asked to speak with him privately, Ed agreed to meet. They sat in Ed's office on a Tuesday afternoon in May 1968. Dylan looked older than his 27 years, wearing his characteristic dark clothes and maintaining the mysterious demeanor that had made him both famous and enigmatic. "Ed, I heard you're not booking Jimi Hendrix," Dylan said without preamble. "That's correct," Ed replied. "He's not right for our audience." "Have you heard him play acoustic guitar?" Dylan asked. Ed was puzzled by the question. "Acoustic? I've only seen the electric performances. The noise, the theatrics." Dylan smiled slightly. "That's what I thought. You're judging him by his volume, not his musicianship. That's a mistake, Ed. A big mistake. I've been in this business longer than that young man has been alive," Ed said defensively. "I know the difference between real talent and spectacle." "Do you?" Dylan challenged gently. "Because I just heard Jimi play acoustic guitar last week, and it was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. He played one of my songs all along the watchtowers, and he understood it better than I did when I wrote it." Ed was intrigued despite himself. Dylan was not given to exaggeration or false praise. If he was vouching for Hendrix's musicianship, "Tell me what happened," Ed said. Dylan described the night in Greenwich Village when he challenged Hendrix to prove his acoustic skills. He told Ed about the stunned silence in the room, about how Hendrix had taken a simple folk song and revealed layers of meaning that even its writer hadn't recognized. Ed, Dylan said seriously, "I've been making music for 15 years. I know real musicianship when I hear it. Jimi Hendrix isn't hiding behind volume and effects. He's using them to express something profound. But the foundation is pure musical genius. Classical technique, blues understanding, jazz improvisation, folk storytelling. He can do it all. Ed listened carefully. Dylan's opinion carried weight, but Ed still couldn't reconcile it with the wild performances he'd seen on film. Bob, even if what you're saying is true, television is different. We can't have him setting guitars on fire or playing with his teeth. Our viewers expect, then ask him to play acoustic. Dylan interrupted. Give him a guitar, no amplification, and let him show you what he can really do. If you're not convinced, don't book him, but at least give yourself the chance to hear what I heard. Ed considered this. It was unusual to audition established performers, but it wasn't unprecedented. If Dylan was right about Hendrix's acoustic abilities, would he agree to such an audition? Ed asked. I think so, Dylan replied. Jimi respects what your show represents. He'd want you to understand his music, not just his image. 3 days later, Ed found himself in an unusual situation. Jimi Hendrix was sitting in Ed's office at CBS, holding an acoustic guitar, preparing to audition for the Ed Sullivan Show, like an unknown performer trying to make his first break. Ed studied Hendrix carefully. Without the stage lights and electric guitars, he looked younger, more vulnerable. He was polite, well-spoken, nothing like the wild man Ed had expected based on his performances. Mr. Sullivan, Hendrix said quietly, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. I know my electric shows are intense. Sometimes people think that's all I can do. Show me what else you can do, Ed said simply. Hendrix positioned the acoustic guitar on his lap, spent a moment tuning it, and then began to play. He started with All Along the Watchtower, the same song Dylan had described, but hearing it firsthand was different from Dylan's description. Ed watched in amazement as Hendrix's fingers moved across the strings with surgical precision, creating rhythm and melody simultaneously. Every note was clear, distinct, purposeful. Then Hendrix began to sing, and Ed understood immediately what Dylan had been trying to tell him. This wasn't spectacle or showmanship. This was pure musical artistry, sophisticated and deeply emotional. As the song progressed, Ed found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed. Hendrix was playing harmony parts that shouldn't have been possible on a single guitar, creating the illusion of multiple instruments through technique alone. The song built in intensity without getting louder, creating drama through musical sophistication rather than volume. When Hendrix finished, Ed sat in silence for a moment, processing what he'd heard. That was extraordinary, Ed said finally. How long have you been playing acoustic guitar? Since I was a kid, Hendrix replied. Acoustic was my first guitar. Couldn't afford electric. Everything I do electric starts with acoustic. The volume and effects, they're just ways of painting with more colors. Ed nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The theatrical elements of your shows, they're part of the music, Hendrix explained, not separate from it. When I play behind my head, or use feedback, I'm not showing off. I'm trying to express emotions that normal playing can't reach. But the foundation is always the song, the melody, the harmony. Ed made a decision that surprised even himself. Mr. Hendrix, I'd like to book you for the show, but I want to present you differently than other shows have. I want America to see what I just saw. Hendrix looked puzzled. You want me to play acoustic on television? I want you to do both, Ed said. Start acoustic, show people your musicianship, your artistry. Then if you want to get electric, but let them hear the foundation first. Hendrix smiled. I've never done that on television before. That's why it will be special, Ed replied. 2 weeks later, on May 26, 1968, Ed made an unprecedented decision. Instead of the usual brief introduction, he would personally introduce Hendrix with an explanation of what viewers were about to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, Ed said to the camera, our next performer is known for his electric guitar playing. But tonight we want to show you something different. Music is about communication, about expressing emotions through sound. Sometimes that requires volume and effects. Sometimes it requires only a voice and a guitar. Here to demonstrate both approaches is Jimi Hendrix. Hendrix walked onto the stage carrying an acoustic guitar, and Ed could see the confusion in the studio audience. This wasn't what they expected from the wild man of rock. Hendrix sat on a simple stool, positioned the guitar, and began playing all along the watchtower exactly as he had in Ed's office. The studio fell completely silent. You could hear individual strings vibrating, hear the wood of the guitar resonating. Ed watched from the wings as the audience's expressions changed from confusion to amazement. They were hearing Hendrix's musicianship without any distractions, seeing the artistry that formed the foundation of his electric performances. The acoustic performance lasted 3 minutes, and when it ended, the applause was different from typical Sullivan Show applause. It was respectful, appreciative, the kind of response usually reserved for classical performances. During the brief pause, while Hendrix's electric guitar was brought out, Ed walked onto the stage. "That was beautiful," Ed said to Hendrix. "Now show them why you choose to go electric." Hendrix strapped on his Stratocaster, and the familiar power chords of Purple Haze filled the studio. But now the audience understood the context. They'd heard the musicianship, seen the artistry, and could appreciate that the electric performance was an extension of those skills, not a cover for their absence. The electric performance was controlled, focused. Hendrix played with his characteristic intensity, but tailored it for television, for Ed's audience. When he played guitar with his teeth, it was clearly a musical technique, not a cheap trick. The audience response was extraordinary. They applauded not just the spectacle, but the musicianship they now understood was behind it. After the show, Ed found Hendrix in his dressing room. "That was perfect," Ed said. "You gave them context, showed them the foundation before the fireworks." "Thank you for letting me do it that way," Hendrix replied. "Nobody's ever asked me to show both sides before." "How did it feel?" Ed asked. Hendrix thought for a moment. Like finally being understood. The reaction to Hendrix's Sullivan appearance was unlike anything Ed had experienced. Critics who had dismissed Hendrix as all flash praised his musicianship. Parents who had been horrified by his electric performances wrote letters saying they now understood his artistry. Musicians who had been skeptical of rock music acknowledged Hendrix's technical skills. But the most significant response came from Dylan, who called Ed the next day. "You did something important last night," Dylan told Ed. "You showed people how to listen to new music, how to understand artists they might otherwise dismiss. That's what great television can do, educate while it entertains." Ed had learned something crucial about his role as a cultural gatekeeper. It wasn't just about presenting safe, familiar acts. It was about helping audiences understand and appreciate artistic innovation, even when it initially seemed threatening or chaotic. Years later, after Hendrix's death in 1970, Ed reflected on that 1968 appearance in interviews. "Jimi Hendrix taught me not to judge artists by their surface presentation," Ed said. "The loudest performer might also be the most skilled musician. My job wasn't to protect viewers from new music. It was to help them understand it." The acoustic-to-electric format Ed created for Hendrix became a template he used for other rock acts. He would ask musicians to demonstrate their foundational skills before showcasing their innovations, helping audiences bridge the gap between familiar and new. Bob Dylan, who had initiated the whole encounter, later said, "Ed Sullivan gave Jimi something precious that night: context. He showed America that electric guitar wasn't abandoning musicianship, it was expanding it." That's what great cultural leadership looks like. The story of Ed Sullivan and Jimi Hendrix demonstrates how assumptions can blind us to talent that doesn't fit our preconceptions. Ed's initial resistance to Hendrix was based on incomplete information, on judging artistry by its volume rather than its substance. But Ed's willingness to listen to Dylan, to give Hendrix a private audition, to create a new format for presenting rock music. That showed the kind of cultural courage that made the Ed Sullivan Show special. Ed didn't just book acts, he helped America understand them. Most importantly, the story shows how great artists can help us appreciate other great artists. Dylan's intervention wasn't just about getting Hendrix booked. It was about helping Ed see musical genius in a form he hadn't recognized before. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and tell us. Have you ever changed your mind about an artist after hearing them in a different context? Sometimes understanding requires more than listening. It requires the courage to question our assumptions about what talent looks like.